There are a multitude of reasons why DC Comics today is probably in worse shape quality-wise than it's ever been in the history of the comic book industry. Everything is just kind of trending downhill outside of Batman for the most part. It's terrible editorial staff. It's really bad writers. It's no stakes. It's doing the same things over and over. And it all comes to like a perfect head right here with Artemis Wanted #1, edited by Chris Rosa and Paul Kaminsky, the Scarlet Letter of DC Comics when it comes to comic book editors. When you see their names in a comic book as being edited by them, you know it's going to be dog crap. This comic book absolutely delivers. Vita Ayala writing, one of the worst comic book writers in all the industry, gets gigs everywhere she goes, but can't seem to write a comic book to save her life. Doing better work over at Marvel somehow, and her work at Marvel isn't very good. We have the death of Hippolyta coming right on the heels of the death of Wonder Woman, Princess Diana, at the end of Dark Knight's death metal. Remember, the death of Hippolyta was the big reason to read Trial of the Amazons. You know, they leaked it before the first issue came out because the sales were really bad. It didn't help. And the big mystery involved in that was who killed Hippolyta and why. And it turns out it was Artemis. And everyone's going, why would Artemis kill Hippolyta? That doesn't even make sense. There's a handful of characters that had motivation to kill Hippolyta. Artemis wasn't one of them, but that was the big murder, and that's the big mystery. And if you enjoyed the reveal, I'm glad you enjoyed it because I didn't. And then we get Artemis Wanted #1, which essentially goes back and undoes the big reveal and the whole reason you were supposed to read Trial of the Amazons in the first place. You can't make this stuff up, folks. Only Vita Ayala and DC Comics could take one of the most classic storytelling tropes in all of writing, the betrayal. You go back to the Bible. Jesus is betrayed by Judas. My goodness. He turns him over to the Romans. He ends up getting crucified. Judas, besieged with grief and all that kind of stuff, I believe ends his own life. Julius Caesar, betrayed by Brutus. The son of his lover and supposedly his friend stabbed him right in the back, killed him in a play for power. And guess what happens to the betrayer? They pretty much live in infamy for the rest of their lives and are scorned pretty much forever. But that's not good enough. We had a female character that was betrayer in Trial of the Amazons. It's time to redeem the goddamn character. And that's pretty much what Artemis Wanted #1 is. It's quite laughable. I do want to say, for $6, you're not going to find a comic book that reads longer than this. It took me like 45, maybe 50 minutes to actually get through this because it's so boring and wordy. Apparently, they're paying Vita Ayala like by the letter. For some reason, it's not for quality. It's quantity that they're after because there is a whole lot of words in this one. Unfortunately, it's mostly gibberish. Let's get right into the story and talk about what's going on with Artemis. Apparently, she's an outcast. We saw her escape Themyscira during Trial of the Amazons, and she's hiding out in the Midwestern section of the United States. And apparently, she's a hobo, traveling from town to town on trains and whatnot. And she ends up in this town where Freya, who used to be an Amazon, was, but she escaped. But when she did escape, apparently she was pregnant, and it gave her a whole new outlook on life. And she's like living in this town with her daughter, who discovers Artemis and just knows immediately that she's a hero. And Artemis is like, no, I'm a terrible person. I murdered somebody. She's like, no, you're a hero. You need to listen to me because I'm 7 years old and I know better than you. And so that seemed quite coincidental and pretty stupid. And then it turns out there's werewolves or something. I don't know, some kind of monsters out there. And hot on their trail, we've got Donna Troy and Cassie Sandsmart. And Cassie is remembering when she brought Artemis in for questioning because she's the detective Cassie Sandsmart now. And she always thought there was something wrong. Something wasn't quite right, but Donna Troy is very upset. She is hell-bent on getting some justice. And somehow they come into this town and they come across the guy that was turned into a werewolf, I believe. Maybe it's another guy. They kind of look the same. Actually, the artist in this comic book is actually pretty good. Her name is Skylar Partridge. She did a really cool series called Resonant with Vault. I don't think the story really does her art justice, and I don't think this story really accentuates Skylar Partridge's strengths as a comic book artist, but it still looks pretty darn good. But Donna Troy and Cassie find this guy that have seen Freya and Artemis, and they're going to track her damn ass down. And Artemis is just besieged by guilt, which is normal in the betrayer story. That's definitely part of the trope. And when they get to her, Donna Troy is ready to lay the smackdown on Artemis's candy ass. She has her down. She knocked her back with her sword. She's crying. She's waiting to be executed. She says, finish it, please, by the gods. It's time to murder me because, you know, I'm a big bad betrayer and I shouldn't have killed Queen Hippolyta using poison of all things. And you see some pretty damn good emotion on the face of Artemis here. Like I said, Scarlet Partridge is actually a really good comic book artist. She deserves a better fate within comic books and a better story to ply her trade, because this thing is not going to sell at all. I don't know if you guys have noticed this. Anything associated with Wonder Woman these days debuts outside the top 100, even if it's a #1 issue. So this thing will likely be read by about 14 people, unfortunately, because the art is good. And we get the big reveal, folks, because Artemis, she was sworn to secrecy by Hippolyta. And we have Hippolyta show up. My apologies for my long absence. Long absence. The event ended like 2 months ago, so in comic book time, it's been about 4 or 5 days, but I guess I'll go with it. Despite all the preparations I made, time moves differently for the gods. You have suffered in silence long enough, dear one. I dissolved your vow of secrecy. Hippolyta, I knew there was something else going on, but I could not have guessed. No one could have guessed that, because this is a terrible execution of the betrayer story. What you see now is the endgame of desperate measures and meticulous planning. I highly doubt that. I think Vita Ayala, Chris Rosa, and Paul Kaminsky are throwing shit at the wall, and this is what decided to stick. Antiope has always been the one among us three sisters that was tapped into the spiritual, but there were many omens and portents, and they became too hard to ignore. They told us a story of grave peril, not just for the Amazon nation, but for the world. Apiron, chaos was coming. Antiope foresaw that if the Amazons were divided, everything would fall. But I knew in my bones that simply uniting the Amazons was not enough. I believe we needed divine intervention. Atalanta convinced us to strike preemptively. That was foolish. We almost lost Antiope. I once again made a case for the gods, but enemies of the Amazons had infiltrated Olympus, and if we were going to save the world, our nation would need a new patron there. There are ways to rise above your station and reach the divide. They're dangerous, arcane, not at all guaranteed, and require much sacrifice. The sacrifice could not be solely ours. We needed a champion of our own, an Amazon with pure heart and unshakable honor, a paragon of Amazon virtue. Though many Amazons fit the description, we found you, Artemis, to be the worthiest. So we decided to have you murder me with poison because that's so honorable. You were the one who would do what needed to be done. So you see, it wasn't Artemis being bad. She poisoned her because she needed to, because it was the good for the Amazon nation, according to Hippolyta. Donna Troy being the voice of reason and kind of the perspective of the comic book reader who just, potentially spent a lot of money on Trial of the Amazons. You mean to say that I read Trial of the Amazons for nothing? I mean, she's talking about the death. Your people mourned you. Your daughter mourned you. And all that time you were making politics with the gods. Your plans hinged on what? Faith and blind luck? And you think that all should be forgiven because it happened to work out in the end? This is madness. But you did. The love and pain. Well, I'm not going to read any more of this. This is absolutely stupid. So you got the first panel. Donna Troy's about to rip somebody's larynx out with her bare hands. And by the end, she understands that it all needed to be done. And Artemis was just doing what was right by murdering somebody and poisoning them. This is the worst interpretation, as I've said, of the betrayer story, because women can't be bad guys in the comics anymore. Even if they murdered somebody, they must be redeemed damn near immediately by DC Comics and terrible writers like Vita Ayala, and even worse comic book editors like a Chris Rosa. She's brought before the Bana Migdal for some type of trial. Queen Faruka is not impressed by Artemis. Kneel and be judged. You stand accused of conspiring and acting in ways conspired treacherous by Bana Migdal law, of murdering fellow Amazon, and of regicide. Do you deny or accept these statements as true? I must accept these statements as true. Yes, I have murdered somebody using poison. With full will and knowledge, I did conspire to end the life of an Amazon, specifically a former queen. And then Donna Troy shows up, and she says a lot of stuff. I just don't have the time or the breath for all that. Well, I have not been a Bana Migdal for long. You never have been. I don't understand why you are now. I have been an Amazon my whole life. On my honor and name, I stand for Artemis and ask not only for mercy for her actions, but that she get her just reward. So apparently we're rewarding people for killing queens now. Queen Faruka says, hey, I, Queen Faruka, decree that General Artemis of the Bana Migdal not only acted in accordance with our laws, but exemplified our way. You can't make this stuff up. It's so bad. DC Comics charged people $6 for this. Thankfully, only like 12 people are going to read it. Maybe a couple of them will buy it for speculation value because it's a #1 issue, but this is just bad. There's a reason you can't sell a goddamn Wonder Woman comic book anymore. It's because creators like Becky Cloonan, Michael Conrad, Stephanie Williams, Vita Ayala are associated with the character right now. It's a dumpster fire. Nobody wants to read any of these characters. And you see something like this, what's the big stakes in Trial of the Amazons? Whoa, the murder of Queen Hippolyta. Who did it? Whoa, it was Artemis. Well, no one said, whoa. They're like, it was Artemis. That doesn't make any sense. But that was the big reveal. And the very next issue that you see Artemis in, redeemed. Never happened. In fact, she's being rewarded for murdering Queen Hippolyta because that was Queen Hippolyta's will so she could talk to the gods. This comic book is lame on so many levels, it's actually hard to fathom. Congratulations, Chris Rosa. You actually subverted my expectations. Congratulations, Vita Ayala. You wrote a worse comic book than I thought maybe it was possible for you to write at this point in your career. I thought you were slightly getting better. But things just aren't very good at DC Comics right now. Like I said, this is the worst time in DC Comics history. It doesn't get worse than this. I talked to my good friend Josh, who's been reading DC Comics his whole life, and we talked it all out. This is it. This is as bad as it's ever going to get.